While there are some big things still working for Disney at the moment, even those may down the road start looking like the real problems that they have now, with some of their major studios and intellectual properties failing left and right. Wall Street looks like they're finally starting to take some serious notice of this, especially in light of their competition that is having wild successes at the box office while Disney continues to flop. Because even big institutional investors like Vanguard have seemingly noticed more recently that if a company out there cares more about its ESG score than actually turning a profit for its stockholders, they might have a problem. Renegade Online. Well, folks, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video, not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment and turn that little red subscribe button to gray. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. On the Sunday Live show, we covered this article here from Fortune magazine, no less. Fortune magazine, of course, the creators of the vaunted Fortune 500 list each and every year. Fortune is one of the most highly respected financial publications, read by a great portion of Wall Streeters. And this is what they had to say this weekend. The force has left Lucasfilm. What has gone wrong for the studio behind Star Wars and Indiana Jones, and how Disney's Bob Iger can salvage his $4 billion investment. To give you a rough idea on where the financial media is on Disney's box office prospects these days, let's just read this from Fortune. At nearly $300 million, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is one of the most expensive films ever made, and initial reviews suggest it could bomb big at the box office when it lands on June 30th. When Iger acquired Lucasfilm for just over $4 billion about a decade ago, it paired the century-old animation company with the studio behind Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yet the match made in heaven now risks becoming an albatross around Disney's neck. Pretty harsh words from Fortune magazine, and that's just the first couple of paragraphs. The third Skywalker trilogy started off with a bang in late 2015 with The Force Awakens, only to end with a whimper 4 years later as fans deserted the franchise. The studio hasn't produced a theatrical release of any kind since, allowing the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, despite recent setbacks, to supplant it as Disney's cash cow. And of course, we've been covering those recent setbacks, as it were, with even things like Thor: Love and Thunder really not even breaking even at the box office. Wakanda Forever may have gotten darn close, particularly after its massive marketing spend. And then into this year, a total flop with Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, costing Disney at least $100 million in losses. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, certainly one of the best entries they've had since Phase 4, if not the best, that has come from Disney and not Sony. Even that is in jeopardy of not breaking even at the box office. When you take the $85 million out of the equation from China, of which Disney only gets about 25% of that box office back in rentals, the movie starts looking a lot more like Thor: Love and Thunder, who didn't have China. And that means Guardians of the Galaxy, at best, might just get to a break-even point. And that's where we are in this day and age. We're now celebrating and hoping for a break-even for major Disney IPs instead of them making huge bank in theaters like they used to just 3 to 4 years ago. The force has left Lucasfilm, says Eric Schiffer, CEO of private equity firm Patriarch Organization, in an interview. That emotional connection it enjoyed with fans has been damaged. Now wait, I was told that that was just a small corner of the internet that really had no bearing on what Star Wars was actually doing. Everything was fine. Fortune magazine and certain private equity firms seem to know better. I wonder if they're paying attention to us on YouTube and actually reading Disney's financial reports. Now that growth has faltered with 4 million customers canceling their membership in the 3 months through March, and Wall Street is pushing Iger to end the scattergun approach of showering creators with money for new content, instead, investors want him to end the over $10 billion in cumulative streaming losses since the launch of Disney Plus 3.5 years ago. Now, to be fair, those losses are $13+ billion to this point. And to also be fair, Most of that 4 million loss in subscribers in this past quarter came from Disney Hotstar in India because of the loss of the streaming rights to the IPL, the cricket league that was very popular. However, Disney does maintain the linear broadcast rights in India to the IPL. What's more important, though, is that during the launch of Mandalorian Season 3 in that same quarter, Disney lost somewhere to the tune of 300,000 subscribers in its core market. That would be North America. Speaking on the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the fans will get a sequel nonetheless called Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. When he swings into theaters a full 42 years after the first installment, that would be Raiders of the Lost Ark. Factoring in marketing and distribution costs, including cinema's cut of receipts, it will likely have to pull in around $800 million at the box office just to break even. The problem with that is, that's if they only spend $100 million marketing the film. This film already was coming in at $300 million as of January 1st of this year, and there's still a lot of post-production that was still being worked on after that point. I think the price tag for this movie is going to be looking closer to $350, and Disney's probably going to spend another $150 at least, like they do for all their major releases, on global marketing. That's going to put the all-in cost for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny at somewhere around $500 million. That means they're going to need to reach around $1 billion at the global box office just to even think about breaking even. Fortune does go on to mention this from the co-founder of the media industry research firm Ampere Analysis. The value of intellectual property cannot be measured simply in a franchise's box office receipts. You need to also take into account its contributions in streaming, in merchandising, in the characters and rides at parks. The problem, of course, with that is the contributions to streaming are for naught, as Disney Plus, as we just mentioned, is about $13 billion cumulatively in the hole from launch, and it's still losing to the tune of about $1 billion a quarter at this point, so I'm not sure what contribution it's making. Then again, perhaps maybe this media research analytics firm didn't quite understand what Disney just stated in their own financial report here in the most recent quarter, the second fiscal quarter for Disney of 2023. This is from page 7. The decrease in merchandising licensing operating income included lower revenue from merchandise based on Star Wars, Spider-Man, Frozen, and the Avengers. Yeah, I'm a bit confused. If you're in decline on the sales of merchandise related to your most potent IPs of the past decade, that seems to be signaling a serious problem with brand damage and customers losing interest. If you're spending $250 to $300 million producing new films and it's not helping you sell any more merchandise, in fact, you're now selling less of it, you have a problem. Lucasfilm did not respond to Fortune's requests for comments. I wonder why. It knows it's running out of excuses now that a movie based on a Nintendo video game proved that you can still rake in over $1 billion post-pandemic as long as you have the right concept. Now, good on Fortune for calling that out, but bad on Fortune for missing the mark. You see, it's not just a Lucasfilm problem. This is a Disney company-wide problem. This is all of their IPs, at least from their major studios. From the big failures at Pixar, the big failures at Walt Disney Animation Studios, the big failures at the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Marvel Studios. This is across the board for the Walt Disney Company. This isn't something just limited to Lucasfilm. And now, one of the most devastating lines of the article. Fans desert Disney Star Wars. At the heart of this mess is Lucasfilm President Kathleen Kennedy. Ho, 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 ho. Fortune magazine. You got points today. A number of fans begrudge her, along with The Last Jedi writer-director Rian Johnson, for deconstructing Luke Skywalker in the third trilogy. Actor Mark Hamill distanced himself from the creative choices of Rian Johnson and Kennedy took with his iconic character in a rare industry rebuke. Antagonized by the perceived shabby treatment of their childhood heroes, fewer and fewer fans showed up from one movie to the next. The third and final installment, The Rise of Skywalker, only took in about half of the $2 billion that the premiere film, The Force Awakens, made for Disney. And I cannot remind fans enough out there of how much they spent on that final movie, reshooting it 2, if not 3 times almost entirely, reportedly with the final production costs coming in at somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 million before they spent a dime to market that film. Yes, Disney lost probably hundreds of millions on that final Star Wars film at the box office. But if that was the year it was going to happen, it was a good thing it was 2019 because Disney had so many other successes that year with Marvel and their other studios that it actually sheltered a lot of those losses on the financial reports. Because honestly, even in 2019, who would ever question a $1 billion retail at the box office, right? And it's perhaps no wonder the company's $5,000 a night Star Wars-themed hotel is shutting down. The tactical mistake of placing in the timeline of the Disney sequel trilogy doomed it to a lifespan of just 18 months after opening. Those wealthy enough to fork over thousands of dollars just to role-play their heroes tend to be middle-aged fans of the original films who want to do battle against the sinister Darth Vader they remember as kids, not the bland and forgettable Kylo Ren. And those older Star Wars fans want to see Kennedy go in favor of someone like Jon Favreau, the Iron Man director and creator of The Mandalorian. Allegedly, negotiations over whether to renew Kathleen Kennedy's contract, due to expire next year, are slated for this August. If that sounds familiar, that's because our friend WDW Pro of thatparkplace.com has been talking about this for nearly 2 years since Kathleen Kennedy was renewed in 2021. He thought, from what he was hearing, that she would probably linger on through the release of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and at that point, she would be making her exit sometime soon thereafter. Could be a few weeks, could be a few months, just weren't sure, but she'd be hanging around through that film. Well, now that time is here, and that film is already set, according to box office projections, not to be doing so well. Matter of fact, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, as of right now, is projected to maybe do no better than Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull from 2008. And that would be a huge disaster for the Walt Disney Company, as I continue to remind folks, especially these days, when they're consuming all of their own content on their own proprietary streaming service that loses $1 billion per quarter. There's no more licensing revenues coming in anymore, and we've seen that time and time again on Disney's financial reports, even shelling out money to buy back content that they have licensed out ahead of time from other companies like Netflix to bring it back home to Disney+. Disney's money is going in the wrong direction for these films after they leave the box office. And if you want to see just how bad it is across the board, look no further than this chart. That blue line up top is the Super Mario Bros. Movie, followed by the red line, Minions: The Rise of Gru, and finally the yellow line below that is Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, a movie that went to premium video on demand, or PVOD, after just 17 days in the theater and went on to haul in almost $500 million globally. All three of those films are from, you guessed it, Universal Studios, which is now consistently eating Disney's lunch every time they walk in the theater. How about Disney's own 2 animated features in the last 12 months? Lightyear and Strange World. Well, I think we all know what happened there. Disney lost $200 to $300 million between those 2 disasters. And it doesn't look like things are going to get any better when Elemental drops in just a few weeks. And speaking of Pixar, let's remind everybody of just a couple of days ago when they eliminated 75 positions, including 2 executives that were behind the box office disappointment of Lightyear. And it was Bob Chapek and Kareem Daniel that insisted several of those Pixar titles in the last couple of years would go directly to Disney Plus, to Pixar's lament. But considering the box office of things like Lightyear and Strange World, well, I wouldn't be surprised to see some articles in the not-too-distant future by Wall Street analysts saying, maybe Bob Chapek had a few things right. Now, I've been saying for quite some time there's absolutely no reason for the Walt Disney Company to still maintain Disney Animation and Pixar as 2 completely separate studios. The costs are frankly just too much, and it's entirely unnecessary. These 2 studios now make effectively the same movies. People can't even tell the difference between Disney Animation and Pixar anymore. They look the same. They sound the same. They use the same stories over and over again. They feel the same. And nobody cares. Nobody's going to the box office to watch any of it anyway. Then again, of course, all of these things were greenlit and put into motion by Bob Iger. This is the type of branding he wanted for the Walt Disney Company. And of course, the biggest problem was that they ran off the heart and soul, the creative talent that made Disney, Pixar, and Disney Animation Studios what they were for the past decade. And that was John Lasseter and his crew that came over when Disney bought Pixar. They're gone now. Disney shuffled them out the door. And now they're all over at Skydance Animation, reuniting with Apple once again. Thanks, Bob Iger. And let's not forget the things like the Disney live-action adaptations nowadays. Well, Mulan was such a mess, thank God it never made it to theaters because it was straight awful. Another movie with the heart and soul ripped out of it. And then we recently got The Little Mermaid, with even Deadline magazine wondering, well, it might not break even. And yes, Disney can engage in some clever accounting tricks by paying themselves a licensing fee from Disney Plus back to the studio for both domestic and international distribution on their own proprietary streaming service, but all of us know that's Fugazi money. That's not the same thing as getting a $100 million check from Netflix, for example. No, this is Disney moving a $20 bill from the right pocket to the left pocket and saying, look, I found money. And let's not forget about the Barbie movie coming from Warner Brothers and Mattel in the next few weeks. If this thing paces or just flat blows the doors off The Little Mermaid for a fraction of the production budget, that is going to be another massive embarrassment for the Walt Disney Company. And quite frankly, it has the potential to do exactly that. Then, of course, there's Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse from Sony Pictures, an animated feature film with about a $100 million budget, less than half of The Little Mermaid's $250, half of what Lightyear was. $209 million 3-day opening weekend. The Little Mermaid's 3-day opening weekend, not including Memorial Day, was about $168 million globally. How did this beat Little Mermaid? The answer, of course, is very simple. Disney's own self-inflicted brand damage. Putting things like sociopolitics ahead of actual creativity and giving audiences what they want. Disney seems more in the business these days of trying to lecture audiences and give them things that they think the audiences need instead of what they want. Meanwhile, their competitors out there like Sony and Universal are just dishing out good movies, fan favorites, people can go watch and enjoy, and it's working. And the box office is proving it over and over and over. And Sony and Universal still have multi-year, multi-billion-dollar deals for third-party distribution after those films leave the theater with places like Netflix and Amazon Prime. But let's step it up one more notch. This from the New York Times about Sean Bailey, the man reimagining Disney classics for today's world. Now, Sean Bailey has been in charge of live-action remakes at the Walt Disney Company, and this article goes to shed a lot of light on, again, the core of Disney's problem from a commercial viability standpoint, putting politics and social gaming ahead of actually turning a positive return on investment for the stockholders. Now, he's had some big successes under his belt, including things like The Lion King and Beauty and the Beast, but give some credit to the actual source material that was used, and then also consider how authentic those films were to the original animated features that they were based upon. Mr. Bailey's heroines are empowered, and his casting emphasizes diversity. A live-action Snow White set for release next year in 2024 stars the Latina actress Rachel Ziegler as the princess known as, quote, the fairest of them all. Yara Shahidi played Tinkerbell in the recent Peter Pan and Wendy, making her the first black woman to portray the character on screen. Quote, we want to reflect the world as it exists, Mr. Bailey said. But that worldview and business strategy has increasingly put Disney and Mr. Bailey in the middle of a very loud and unpolite cultural fight. For every person who applauds Disney, there seems to be a counterpart who complains about being force-fed wokeness. And as I said before, if a company puts ESG and DEI initiatives ahead of actual commercial viability and return on investment to stockholders, that company probably has a problem. And in this case, Disney is prioritizing diversity and representation, which in and of itself is not an issue. Matter of fact, let's go back, as we just said a minute ago, people are really enjoying Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and that whole series of films from Sony starring Miles Morales, an offshoot character of Spider-Man. But people don't care because it's a different character and it's fun. But Disney has been taking classical characters and changing things, trying to increase that DEI and ESG perspective, and it's cost them dearly at the box office because fans are apparently getting turned off by what they deem as cheap virtue signaling, and quite frankly, and more importantly, just a lower grade remake of what was already an almost perfect original. As I stated on the Sunday Live show, if they had just thrown red hair on top of Halle Bailey's head instead of what they did, I think the movie probably could have pulled in another $100 million, but they didn't. And they also added an extra unnecessary 45 minutes to the runtime of that film. And wanting to reflect the world as it exists, I'm sorry, this is escapism, and you're violating one of the 3 John Lasseter rules. Make the world believable, but not realistic. And that's the key to escapism and telling good, engaging stories that audiences want to dive into. Disney has lost perspective of that. They're not good storytellers anymore. They are simply political pundits using their IPs as modern-day vehicles to push their political narrative into the kids. And parents have become none too happy with this, and the box office reflects it. Unbelievably, the New York Times actually stumbled across a cogent thought of truth. One of the knocks on Mr. Bailey at Disney is that he has not created a new franchise. Almost none of his bets on original movies have paid off. At some point, studios cannot endlessly recycle old stuff. A Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox ends up as a blank page. And this is what people out there need to start understanding. Disney is failing because they aren't telling good stories anymore. They're telling the same old stories from 30, 40, and 50 years ago, and they're doing, quite frankly, a piss-poor job of it. They're wrecking those old IPs, and as we showed you earlier, on Disney's own financial reports, even the merchandise sales of those classic IPs are suffering right now because of that. Disney simply no longer has the talent pool in that company to create anything new of any real value out there. They're so interested in engaging in politics like they are with Florida right now for things that they had no business getting involved in to begin with, because what was the point? Did we see Universal Studios or Comcast jump into that fight over that certain piece of Florida legislation? Heck no. And you better believe that Universal was under intense pressure to get involved in it as well. They simply brushed it off and ignored it, and they are now reaping the rewards for having done so. At the end of the day, Wall Street needs to understand that the person in charge of Disney right now, Mr. Robert Iger, is the architect of all of Disney's current problems, and he is unlikely to be able to fix his own mess, because he doesn't see anything he's done so far as a mess. He thinks society is the problem. The audience is the problem, and they're going to continue trucking along with what they're doing, even while they make billions of dollars of cuts from content production and writing down programs, throwing them off of streaming services like Disney Plus and Hulu to try to save the balance sheet. And I think we all know by now why Disney is so desperate to salvage the balance sheet that has been dwindling now for quite some time. The stock price is stuck in the doldrums, back to where it was years ago, while many of the other components on the Dow have climbed nicely since then. Disney languishes behind. And at this point, it obviously is going to have an impact on this: the sale of Hulu, or the remaining stake of Hulu that Comcast still holds. And they will be able to drop the put on Disney in just a few months. And I'm sure that's going to wind up in court as they argue over the valuation of it. Disney is hoping to pay around $10 billion. Of course, Comcast wants closer to $25 to $30 billion for that stake. The fight will linger on, but this is what Disney's concerned about right now, and this is what this is all geared towards. And almost all of those financial woes are overwhelmingly attributable to Bob Iger's leadership and bad decisions. And that goes for the board of directors too, quite frankly. Some changes probably need to be made there as well. I hope Nelson Peltz is still watching and cheering for Disney as I am. I'd love to see them get back to the old glory days. But the fact remains, when you put ESG and DEI as priorities over ROI, and your audience is consistently telling you by not showing up at the box office and by not buying your merchandise in the same quantity, or not going to your $5,000 Star Wars hotel, that, hey, Disney, you have a problem. We're not interested in your products or your virtue signaling anymore, and you choose to ignore that, I frankly don't think you're being very good fiduciaries of the stockholders' assets, and maybe it's time for a change. You can't keep putting your social score ahead of reality and financials, and you can't keep putting grown men with mustaches wearing a dress as a greeter at the Disneyland Bippity Boppity Boutique and not expect fans to react in shock. It doesn't matter what you think is right or wrong in your own mind for what you want to drive into society. Your job is to turn a profit for the stockholders. Your job is to make movies and products that will generate the highest amount of sales, the biggest return on investments. And you're putting that by the wayside because you think that your message or the message is the most important thing. And Disney stockholders need to start asking themselves a few questions about whether or not that you are the right folks for the job. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And until next time, take care.